Welcome to Desert Well, a place where we gather like travelers, finding refreshment and community around life's most essential source. Throughout history, wells have been places where people pause their journey, places where they share stories and find the sustenance they need to continue on. But we're here because we've discovered something even better. Jesus promised that whoever drinks from the water he gives will never thirst again. That living water doesn't just satisfy, it becomes a spring welling up to eternal life. So whether you're navigating the challenges of family life, wrestling with questions of faith, or simply trying to live faithfully in a complicated world, we invite you to pull up a chair around this well. Here, we'll explore how God's unchanging word speaks into our everyday experiences, offering wisdom, hope, and the kind of refreshment that truly lasts. This is Desert Well, where life's conversations meet living water.
Welcome back to the Desert Well, where we gather around the well that is Jesus, both to drink deeply from his gospel news that he offers to you, to me, to the world, but also to be a part of the conversation. And today, I'm genuinely excited, not just because we have someone else on the podcast. So Derek and I are not talking in circles, and I am saying things that I later regret like I did last week, but because we get to hear a different perspective and we get to take in knowledge, expertise from somebody else. And so we have with us today Ryan Strehlow. I think that's how you say your last name. I should have asked you that before we started. And he is a very unique individual, at least from what I know about him. But I'm going to let him introduce himself a little bit, tell a little bit about his story, and then kind of lead us into what we're going to talk about, the unique things that he might have for us today. So, Ryan, I'll let you introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about who you are, family life, all those sort of things.
Yeah, so glad to be with you guys. Appreciate the chance to be here. My name is Ryan Strehlow, and I am the 8th grade counselor here at Faith Lutheran Middle School in Las Vegas. And I've been in this role just now for like 6 months, I guess. We moved here in July from Idaho. We spent the last 10 years in Idaho. Originally, I grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, went to school at Concordia, Chicago, and studied to be a DCE, Director of Christian Education. And so I served in that role for 13 years as a middle school and high school youth director. And about 3 years ago, started the process of getting my master's in school counseling, and which kind of led to where we are now, and kind of in my first year of full-time education, but my last call in the church that I was working in, we had a school that was like PK through 12, and we had about 550 students in that school, which kind of pushed kind of that desire to go down that school counseling track inside of that youth ministry focus for me. So I'm married, have a wife, Alexis. We'll be married 10 years actually this summer, and 2 kids. So Hayden, who's at Lamb of God with you guys, and then Macy, who was just born in the end of August. And just figuring out life as a family of 4, brand new, and doing all that kind of stuff too. So
our connection point is Lamb of God here. So Ryan and his family, right, sent Hayden here to our school and had been thinking about becoming members here. And so as I often do, I try and invite conversation. And Ryan, I appreciate that you actually took me up on that. And so we sat down together and just chatted about, hey, what is life here at Lamb of God? What's your story? How might we help you, live out your faith and all those sort of things? And the thing that was most interesting to me is the role in the switch too. So previously DCE and now a counselor. And so, I mean, it's one of those, you don't have to look very far to read about, whether it's something like the book Anxious Generation, about the problems that our young people have. I think I can say that now. I'm 33, so I'm old enough to say young people now. And whether it's that, or I'm reading a book right now called When Hurting People Come to Church. which is all about like how can a church help people through the mental health struggles that they have. And so being someone who's been in the church, being someone who now serves in a role still in a religious organization or at a Christian school, a Lutheran school, all of those sort of things. So I guess let's maybe roll way back and just talk about your heart for ministry. Like, why did Ryan become a DCE in the first place? And how did you get to that point before we talk any more about these counseling things?
Yeah, so like I said, I grew up in Milwaukee, and I call Milwaukee one of the 3 Lutheran meccas in the U.S. because there's just like a Lutheran church and school on every single street corner. Both my parents, my mom and my dad, were Lutheran educators. My mom has been kind of early elementary the majority of her career. She just retired. My dad passed when I was pretty young, but he was a middle school math teacher in Lutheran schools and athletic director and all that kind of stuff as well. And so it's kind of always just been in my family. My sister is a kindergarten teacher at a Lutheran school in Texas, just outside of Austin. And so originally my assumption was that I was going to be some sort of a secondary ed education person. And I was thinking history. I really liked history. Hindsight, I would have flamed out of any sort of academic rigor. I really should have just been a PE teacher. That's probably what I should have been. But I went to National Youth Gathering and as a junior going into my senior year, and there's just kind of a culmination of a whole lot of things happening at my life at that point. But I really felt like going into education wasn't the answer. And just kind of like, honestly, it's a long story in some ways, but like one night at National Youth Gathering, I just like vividly was like yelling at God in prayer, just like, tell me what to do. And God didn't answer me. But then I went to go talk to my youth director. They said, have you ever heard about this thing called DCE? And I'm like, no, what's that? And that's kind of a weird thing about Milwaukee is for as many churches and Lutheran schools there's not a whole lot of DCEs. Like there's youth directors, paid youth directors, but there's not a ton of DCEs actually. And so I didn't really know. And they told me, well, you basically get to do this every day of your life. And I had just come off of like the 7 most impactful days of my life. And I'm like, I get to be at National Youth Gathering 365 days a year. Sweet.
Sign me up.
So I kind of went, yeah. So I kind of went to Concordia on a whim, to be honest with you. At the time, I was dual enrolled for education and DCE.
Sure.
And they told me it was going to take like 6.5 years. And I was like, there's no way I'm doing that. And so I just chose DCE and didn't look back really. So.
Yeah. So you said a couple things that hit home a little bit. History teacher, that's what I had originally gone for. Jared, you had talked about that as well. So you're in good company there. We all have kind of a history teacher background where
failed history
none
teachers
of us are teaching history. And the second one, I was going to ask you how you ended up at Concordia Chicago. I feel like you either know that you are going to a Concordia from, the get-go, or like in your case, it just kind of happens. And that's how it was for me too. Like no plans of going to Concordia whatsoever. And then it was just like God took a 2x4 and hit me over the head and said, you're going to Concordia. And then, kind of the rest is history. So it's fun to see, different people's stories play out and how they end up at the Concordias. And then, like you were saying too, with your dual degree pathway, how you ended up on the DCE route solely is pretty cool too.
Yeah. I really desperately wanted to go to a Big Ten school, and just watch college basketball all the time. But I was not smart enough to get into any of those universities. And I tried to go to Concordia St. Paul because I wanted to play golf up there, but they were D2 and my golf game didn't really break out till I was a senior. So that coach had no desire to really look at me at all. And I just kind of ran from Concordia, Chicago, because both my parents had gone there, to be honest with you. And on the drive to St. Paul, I was just like, this is way too far from home, and which is crazy to think about now, because now I've lived in Alaska, Idaho, and Vegas, so I'm nowhere near what home is. But it was kind of one of those things where it fit really well, and the moment I stepped on campus, it was like, this is where I'm supposed to be.
So I think some people here are familiar with DCEs. I know at least some of the history at Lamb of God. We had a DCE intern, I think, for a couple of seasons, and then maybe a full-time DC, if my memory is right. But would you just give us you sort of said already, but what does a DCE do? What does that mean? Hey, we're a bunch of acronym people: LCMS, DCE, DCO, what is it? DPO, DPM, Director of Parish Music. I mean, all these sort of things. Give us a little bit more about what is an actual DCE. What do you do? Stuff like that.
So I always say, like, the DCE role and responsibility changes from church to church. Like, it's never going to be exactly the same. My first congregation I was in, we were a smaller church, and I was doing birth to death ministry, essentially. So I would be delivering a children's message and Sunday morning worship, and then going over and wood carving with our 85-year-old retired military dude,
Cool.
At Grace, where I was at in Idaho, that was definitely more honed in on like a middle and high school focus. Doing middle and high school youth group every week, teaching confirmation, teaching first communion classes. I had a hand in like Sunday morning stuff with Bible hour, and even some things in worship and stuff like that too, especially when we had pastoral vacancies and stuff like that. But really a lot of it was kind of that middle school focus, like retreats. I was really big into, that was kind of my niche in ministry, was planning retreats, and pulling people together too. So I kind of, in Idaho, I started a whole group where South Idaho, we got all of our churches together a couple times a year and did retreats as like multiple churches coming together. Oh, cool. Because in Idaho, there was a lot of really tiny churches that just didn't have either a full-time youth person or, anybody who could like kind of do youth ministry full time. And so we basically were just trying to make the case to these smaller churches, give us $60 and just show up with your youth and we'll do everything for you, and so that was kind of a cool way to just bring a lot of churches in South Idaho and northern Utah together too. And so that was a big focus of what I was doing. So.
Well, and that's exactly kind of like what the National Youth Gathering does on a miniature scale, right? I mean, you talk about kids, what do they love the most? Well, I'm not the only one. Look at all these people that believe the same thing. And so there you go. You really did get to do the National Youth Gathering all the time, every day as you worked. So you said earlier your desire for counseling stemmed from your work as a DCE in your school. So can you tell us a little bit more about, how did those stirrings start? I mean, it's a very unique thing, at least in my mind, to see church workers pivot in that way. You sort of either, I guess, well, this was a duh, but you either start as a church worker and you finish as a church worker, or you start and you pivot, which is obviously. But nevertheless, I feel like it takes, a real stirring, a real leading to make that change, because you've gone to school for it, you're in the role already, and so, call it a leap of faith or call it something, but obviously you saw a need that you felt like God could use you to fit. So I'm just curious kind of how that all came about, what it was that you saw, all those sort of things.
Yeah, so I think, for me, I knew that I was not going to be a lifelong youth director. Like, it just wasn't going to be what I was going to be able to do. I loved the work. I still could have probably done youth ministry for another 5 or so years probably, but just doing youth ministry is not necessarily like the most conducive thing to having like small children at home, and I mean, I was gone probably a good 30 nights a year on different retreats and mission trips and things like that, and multiple nights a week. And then on top of it, I was coaching as well, for our school. And so inside of basketball season, it wouldn't be uncommon for me to be gone 5 nights a week, you know? And so for me, I felt a shift coming in ministry, and really worked hard to try to figure out like what that could look like. And I, coming out of COVID, I could tell that there was a lot of kids like really struggling with mental health and, being cooped up and just all these different things. It felt like COVID amplified everything. I mean, it's not a shocking statement to make, but kids were talking about self-harm and suicidality and different things like that at a much higher rate. And I didn't just want to be like the youth director or church person who said, well, I'm good at talking to people, and so I can sit in a room and I can call myself a counselor. Like, I actually wanted education behind what I was doing, and I wanted to like protect our church too, because I was informally counseling kids, and stuff like that, but it was starting to deal with like more real stuff. And so I wanted to protect myself, protect the church, and help kids in like a legitimate, meaningful way, rather than just like throwing logic behind how I was guiding kids, So to be honest, for me, it was between actually going back to seminary in some way, shape, or form and being a pastor, or going this counseling route. I, in no way, shape, or form did I think that getting the counseling degree would end me in Las Vegas, Nevada. I ironically did joke about it a little bit, because I was not getting a ton of headway with the church that I was at. And I just said, well, I'm sure Faith Lutheran Las Vegas would hire somebody. And sure enough, like a few years later, here I am. But really my thought was, the reason I ended up in the school counseling degree was because it was the fastest route to finish my degree and get licensed. Because in a clinical mental health role, you have to do like 2,000 to 3,000 hours. And a school counseling route was only about 750. And so it was just a quicker way for me to get to licensure and to be able to help kids in meaningful ways.
That's all. I mean, that's just 750. Is that what you said? Just 750.
Yeah.
I mean, that's still a ton of hours of practice, of preparing. And I mean, I think as a pastor, I think some people do at least, have this view of me as counselor, right? I would say of more mid-sized to smaller churches, that's especially how people view their pastor, right? It's hey, I'm feeling this thing, or I'm going through this thing, and I want my pastor to counsel me. And yet, how many classes did I have at the seminary about pastoral counseling? That's right. Ryan knows. 1, right? And it was great. I loved my pastoral counselor. Dr. Rick Mars was fantastic. He did a great job. And yet I also know one of those things, right? The more you know, the more you realize you don't know. And even though I had to go in and sit on some counseling, there's a seminary just down the road from St. Louis that would give free counseling for their people who were in the program. And so we had to sit in on sessions, things like that. Largely, my main takeaway that still sticks with me, 6 years later now, was that my role as a counselor should be more about listening and less about talking. And yet that's good, but it can only take you so far too. And so the knowledge gap is so massive. And so I can really appreciate hey, I want to make sure I'm doing good here. I want to make sure that I'm not causing harm. I want to make sure that, you use the language of protecting yourself and protecting your church. I'm curious, what was that process like? I mean, going to school while being that just sounds like a big lift. But the church that you were at, I'm assuming, was pretty enabling, pretty supportive of that. I mean, that's like a big release to go and do something that they sort of gifted you in that.
Yeah, it was awesome, the support. I mean, they supported financially a little bit, which was huge, just to, help that process out for me, and at least like get the wheels turning on it,
Sure.
Which was awesome. I think too, there was to go and get those practicum and internship hours, there was support for me to leave and to go and do that. In the early part of it, it was easy enough to do on my off days because I had Friday off, and so most of my practicum hours I could do just on my day off over 16 weeks. But once I got into that first internship, then I had to leave for about 20 hours a week to go do that, but I mean, that being in church ministry isn't a 40-hour a week kind of gig either, and so and especially like on the DCE side, with me being gone as many nights as I was too, like you really in some ways could kind of justify some of that time that I was missing, because I really was still putting in 8 hours on the back end of all that kind of stuff up at school and church and stuff like that too. And so it was great though. I mean, they were very supportive, and we really did, kind of see a vision for something to happen, and kind of materialize there, in Idaho. And it just never kind of crossed the finish line on it. But there was just a ton of support to be able to and it was hard. I mean, I was staying up 1 or 2 nights a week till midnight, 1 a.m. working on banging out 12 page papers and stuff like that, but at the time, our oldest son was not sleeping well. And so I just kind of lived with the mindset of like, if I'm going to be awake until 2 a.m., I might as well be awake writing a paper or something, and so it just kind of was what it was,
Sure.
So
good for you. I mean, that's a much more positive mindset, right? If my kid is awake at 2 a.m., I'm laying there in bed going, oh, go back to sleep. not thinking about what book should I be reading or what project should I be advancing. Derek, any questions for him before we sort of move on to like, hey, what do you do now? How does that all work?
No, but like this whole time I'm just thinking like, what a cool story, and how awesome for you that you pursued something that God placed on your heart in that way to help the youth that you were seeing. There was a real problem, and you found a real solution to that by going the route that you did, because it is like, as an educator, right, as a church worker, oftentimes like what Pastor Jared was saying, we are seen as counselors in a way, right? But we're not. We're not equipped to be the main counselor, the main person that can help through a lot of those things. So we definitely need more people like you in your role to support our students in that way too. So just awesome. Yeah, I'm just sitting here taking this all in and just enjoying your story.
Yeah, thanks.
So let's talk about what you do now then. As a school counselor, I mean, this is probably a bad view of what this is, right? But when I was in high school, my school counselor was the person who helped you figure out where you wanted to go to college and helped you choose your classes. And that beyond that, I have no idea what they did, if they did anything. But that was what most people thought they did. So I'm sure, and that is not at all what you went to school for, and I hope that's not what you do. But tell us.
And see, that's why I went into education, because I wanted to do just that. And my counselor was like, well, you have to be a teacher first. And I was like, oh, okay, well, I guess I'm going to be a teacher. And then I found out that there was much more to the guidance counselor, school counselor, than just that. So I went a different route.
Yeah, so it's really interesting, like coming through the field right now, I think, because there's a huge like national movement to, and Derek, I don't say this to like, bash on you, but like there's a big movement to be like, don't call us guidance counselors. Like that's because that's what it was in like the 80s, 90s, even early 2000s and stuff like that. And because that's all it was. It really was just like career readiness and college counseling. Like that was pretty much all it was. And I would say like there's a level of desire from the school counseling community to just be, I think respected a little bit more. But truly, I think in the last 15 years, the level of academic rigor that's been required to like get that school counseling degree has changed kind of exponentially. And so there is kind of more of a push. So we kind of talk about like three main areas where we focus is, academic, career readiness, and then social emotional counseling. Those are kind of the three main areas that we focus on. To be honest with you, like I would have never guessed that I would be in a middle school role. It was probably one of my least favorite things I did as a DCE was middle school youth group. And then here I mean, granted, I am our 8th grade counselor, so I get the oldest age inside of that age bracket. But I really would have thought that high school would have been that spot for me. And my first internship was at a middle school, and I actually really enjoyed the balance of all three of those kind of categories. Like I really do think that it really kind of is a pretty even split of what I do on a daily basis of pulling kids in because they're really struggling in some classes or they're not turning homework in, or then I am pulling in kids who are having major friendship issues or like difficult situations at home, or, the amount of self-harm and suicidality inside of middle school kids is pretty big right now, and having those bigger conversations. But even for me this year as the 8th grade counselor, which I've really appreciated, just a month ago, we were doing course selections for next year as kids are heading into the high school. And even as an 8th grader, you're having conversations with kids to say, okay, a lot can change in 4 years, but if you are actually applying for colleges right now, not high school, what do you think you'd be doing? Right. And so helping them pick the courses in high school that can get them on the track to make sure that they're doing the things that they need to do, And so for me on the middle school side, like I think that's been a really neat thing is kind of finding that balance between all three of those things, I even see in our high school counselors here, and granted the high school is bigger than the middle school is, but in our high school counselors, there really is a huge focus on academic and especially career and college readiness, just because, we're at a private school with high tuition dollars and we are a college prep school. And so parents are paying money to make sure that their kids go to college and go to a good college too, and so on the high school side, I do think that really is a pretty big focus of what they're doing.
So when you think about the challenges that kids face today, like anything, if you go somewhere on the internet, you will read different things, right? We'll just say it that way. But, as someone who is call it a first responder or a on the ground, in the water, whatever analogy you want to use, what do you see kids struggle with most? I'm just going to ask it that broadly and kind of allow you to go with it where you please.
Yeah, it's probably hard to lump that all into one thing.
Sure. Or a couple, whatever.
You called out this book earlier. I haven't read this book. As somebody who has a master's degree now, I'm a terrible reader. I hate reading. But I will espouse what the Anxious Generation says, which is like the biggest barrier to kids' success is this thing right here, to put a tiny computer in the hands of 8, 10, 12, 14-year-old kids, is kind of crazy when you think about it. I think we're all roughly the same age. I didn't have my first cell phone until I was a sophomore in high school, and it was a Nokia brick phone with T9 texting, and I had to pay my mom $20 a month to be able to send out 20 text messages. Like we look back on that, I think sometimes, and say man, we really missed out on all these kids. And now I look back on it and I'm like, I was so blessed to be sheltered from what these kids have to experience on a day-to-day basis. I mean, shoot, even last week, I just deleted Twitter from my phone because I could not handle the toxicity that was on it. And I'm just like, I don't want to look at this anymore because it's taking time away from things at home, from things at work, from like, and kids are doing that every day at an exponential level, you know, with Instagram, Snapchat, you know, all these different avenues of like what the world is sending to them, but then on top of that, like what their friends are sending to them too, you know. um, our dean of students here has an interesting, he started tracking it because he realized that it was coming in at such an alarming rate that he is like, I need to start to track this so I have something to say. He said of all of the like issues that he has with students at school, like especially things that happen outside of the school, he said 80% of discipline problems that happen outside of the school can go and be reverted back to a group text message.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
It's not like a one-on-one text or even necessarily social media. He said the prevalence of group text messaging inside of like how often kids are in trouble, it's at an 80% clip that's coming into his office. Granted, like social media mixes in there. I'm sure kids are sending things and different stuff like that, you know, but I would just say, like, if you're a parent with a kid anywhere from the age of 8 to 18 and you're not limiting your kids' access to phones or iPads or whatever, like, you know, you need to deeply consider that. I guess I will say it that way. Because
and I think, like, going off of what you said about the group chat, I think that oftentimes that's one that's overlooked.
Yeah.
Because it's like, hey, they're just talking to their friends or, you know, whatever. But I like to look at it in this way. And again, it's kind of aging us a little bit, right? When we left school, yes, we had the ability to text our friends, but that was extremely limited. And we had to be very careful with it because I think I had 150 messages a month or something like that. And you could blow through that in an hour if you really wanted to, right? But when we left school and we didn't have an activity with our friends, that was it, right? Like our social interaction with the people that we were with all day long was done.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a chance to reset and then come back the next day. And so when they have, you know, when students today have a device or kids have a device, they don't have that ability to disconnect as much. And oftentimes, yeah, it is in that group chat where, you know, it's something that's like, they're just talking to their friends. Well, what are they talking about? What are they doing in that group chat that we should be aware of, right?
I think too, like the content of what kids receive and what they look at, you know, I mean, I was just talking to my sister-in-law about this because they're starting to let their kids watch like old Nickelodeon shows and stuff like that, right? So they're like, yeah, they're watching like Rocket Power right now, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. Like, and I think I was watching shows like that, Hey Arnold, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, to be fair, like somewhat crude cartoonish shows, right? Or like not necessarily teaching kids the best of the best things. Compared to that to today, though, and you have like 4th, 5th, 6th graders walking into buildings and telling you they just watched the latest Stranger Things, you know? And that is a crazy thing to be thinking about. I mean, my wife and I sometimes will have to turn off that show and be like, we can't go to sleep if we watch this. Like, you know? And there's 4th graders that are watching shows like this up until like midnight up in their bed, you know? And so I think it's crazy too to think about the level of like adult content that is being pushed down kids' throats at such a young age too.
So what, I mean, I think you sort of already hinted out at, hey, as a parent, we consider these things. I mean, what, two weeks ago we talked about technology here on Desert Well and the sort of role it plays and how it's not necessarily just a tool, right? That it might naturally lean more one way than the other as far as our health and wellness, if you will. But what, from your perspective, you know, being a church worker, stuff like that, what can we do as a church to help, whether it's kids, adults? I mean, you know, hey, as people who care about everyone's well-being, right? We care about their their mental, their physical, their spiritual, their emotional well-being, because you're a whole person created by God, body, soul, spirit, all of it. So help us say or tell us, hey, I'm always thought, or I've always wondered, why doesn't the church do more of this? Or how could we fill this gap? Those sort of things.
I think just being a source of information is probably pretty helpful, like, I don't know. For me as a DCE, granted, it's a little bit easier than like standing up front in a pulpit on a Sunday morning, but like I was very open and honest about real conversations, right? I mean, for instance, this is kind of a little bit outdated now because I don't think it's necessarily like the biggest problem in the world compared to other things that kids face. But I mean, the average age of exposure to like pornography in the US is like age 9, how you define that has drastically changed again in the last like 20 years, because basic TV shows now have things that would have been considered pornography 20 years ago inside of them. But that still is a pretty shocking statistic, right? And so, like, I think a lot of times we watch the news or we read different things about this horrific thing that happened, and we say to ourselves, that would never happen to me, or that would never happen to my kids, or that would never happen inside of this small town, or whatever, right? But statistically speaking, that's just not a logical answer, right? If these things are, if these stats are being pushed out to us, that technology is affecting these kids in these ways, and those numbers are 70, 80, 90%, we have to be honest and say, it is extremely possible, if not probable, that my kid has dealt with these very same things, right? And so I think having breakout informational sessions about something like that on a Sunday morning, in lieu of a Bible study, or a Saturday evening, let's get together and have dinner and let's talk about what are the most at-risk apps. I mean, we're getting to the point too where like even games like Roblox, like there are very foul, disgusting things and predators that are inside of games like that people just assume are kid games, and that's not what's happening. And so like I think there's a level of that will never happen to me, but in reality, like it's almost impossible that a 10-year-old, 12-year-old kid has not had an interaction with an adult in some way, shape, or form on that game without knowing who that is. And to think that the majority of kids are having that happen, like we've got to be honest and just be more vocal about things like that.
And that's the exact case that the anxious generation makes, right? The whole summary of the book is that we overprotect in the physical world because we think it's so dangerous, but we underprotect in the digital world because we assume it's safer, when the exact opposite is true. So you're saying the same thing that he is saying too, without even having read the book. So well done. Kudos to you, points to you, all those sort of things. So I know we sort of want to wrap here. Derek, any last questions for Ryan before we send him?
Well, 2 things. Can I get you to lead a workshop for us?
Yeah, probably. I mean, it's a funny thing to hear you guys call me an expert when I'm like, 4 months into this gig. But like I do think that there is just a level, like the world is missing a little bit of logic in it right now, and so I think that is the expertise that I speak from is I feel like there's a lot of opportunities to just be like, okay, we need to realistically and rationally talk about these things and just speak the quiet things out loud a little bit more. So, yeah, I mean, I guess the answer is yes.
I'd love to talk to you more about that. And then I guess if you could give advice or information to, specifically like our parents or elementary age parents as they are preparing to have their children enter middle school, whether it be at Faith or whether it be somewhere else, just like what is one piece of advice that you would give to them?
I guess to like stay on theme with a lot of the stuff we've talked about is I would just say insert yourself into your kids' lives more than you think you should, you know? Um, we live in a strange like moment in time, I think, where a lot of parents kind of live in this space where it's like, okay, I got my kids to middle school or I got my kids to high school, and like, boom, now it's somebody else's job, you know? And um, that's kind of wild. Like, like as parents, like you should be not just asking your kids every single night, is your homework done? You should be logging on to whatever school portal your kids have and confirming that they actually turned in the homework that they had due that day. You should be forcing your kids to leave their phones in the kitchen overnight and not allowing them to have their phones in their room. You should be reading their text messages and making sure that they're not saying and doing things that they might not even have any awareness that they're even involved in something bad, you know? And kids might protest and they might be upset about it. And I'll steal my old administrator's favorite line, which was, the moment you make a mortgage payment, I will ask for your desire and interpretation on how your phone should be handled, you know? And I think like kids are in I'm telling kids all the time, they're in a massive rush to grow up, and they just need to stay kids as long as possible, you know? Don't get me wrong. There are copious things that I love about being an adult, but like there's a lot of things that I do miss about being a kid too, you know? And so I think just like letting kids stay kids for as long as possible and just making sure as a parent you're inserting yourself into their lives as much as possible is really, really helpful.
I love that. It's a helpful way and a reframing, I think, of what your job is as a parent. So often I feel like the understanding is I need to, like you said, get them to a certain point and then like kick them out the door or hand them off to somebody else. And then if I fail at that, then it's a reflection on my own well-being. But I think it's David Tripp talks about parenting in his book Parenting as kids are gifts to be stewarded, right? And so if your child is a gift to be stewarded from God, you're not going to put the gift into a corner and say, go, right? You're not going to put a plant onto a countertop by a window and say, grow, without watering it, without tending to it. And that's the role that, Jesus and God wants you to play in your kid's life, that it's not about, you're not trying to kill their fun, right? You're not trying to be the fun killer. You're trying to steward the gift that God has done and realize that God is actually at work in you and through you for the sake of that kid as you do those hard things, which is ultimately leadership in its own sort of unique way too. So good stuff. I feel like we could go for another half an hour or so, but let's call it here. Any last words from you, Ryan?
No, I mean, just keep your head down. I was just telling you right before we started this, we're in a brutal month and a half long stretch right now with, kids not sleeping at home. And, everybody, I think, always has that kind of encouraging piece of like, it's just a moment in time. Like, I guess I would just say that's true when your kids are 10 years old, when they're in middle school, when they're in high school, like, just continue to reinvest and like know that what you're doing matters and that other parents are going through the exact same things that you're going through. Maybe not specifically the same things, but I promise you generally that every other parent is getting into fights with their kids about screen time and usage and how to handle friends. And it's just important for people to know that they're not alone. So
absolutely. The Lord Jesus is with you, but you're also doing the same thing other people are doing too. And there's great value that's found in that. Well, we appreciate your time today, and maybe we'll have you back on in like a part 2 someday. I mean, there are so many things we could have talked about, and we just didn't even look at or mention it all. So anyway, thanks again, Ryan. glad that you've been with us this week as we have gathered around the well of Jesus. Curious what your biggest takeaway was, whether it's leave a comment and let us know in person. We'd love to hear what you thought and any other questions that you have. If you see Ryan around, whether it's in worship or somewhere out in the community, tell him you said hi and you saw him here. I'm sure that would tickle his fancy, so to say, and he'd love to know that you found what you found valuable about what he said, all those sort of things. So we'll catch you next week as we gather around the well of Jesus on and at the Desert Well.